Your warehouse has fork truck traffic blind spots. Collision awareness does not. Their motion sensing safety systems detect fork truck traffic and alert workers at intersections, overhead doors, and other high-risk zones. Proudly made in the U.S., their products help reduce the risk of accidents by giving your employees additional visibility or potential traffic just around the corner. Visit collisionawareness.com to build a safer warehouse. That's collisionawareness.com to make your warehouse safer.
The New Warehouse Podcast, hosted by Kevin Lawton, is your source for insights and ideas from the distribution, transportation, and logistics industry. A new episode every Monday morning brings you the latest from industry experts and thought leaders. And now, here's Kevin.
Hey, it's Kevin with the New Warehouse Podcast, bringing you a new episode today. And on today's episode, I am going to be joined by Manish Kapoor, and he is the founder and CEO at Growth Catalyst Group. And we are going to talk a little bit about his background, how he came to found this company, Growth Catalyst Group, or GCG. And we're going to talk a little bit about what he's seeing in the industry right now, some of the challenges, how companies are navigating these challenges, and also a little bit about what does he see on the technology and innovation side within warehousing and fulfillment operations. So, Manish, welcome to the show. How are you?
Thank you. Good to be here. Doing well.
Definitely happy to get you on. Happy to talk about this and learn a little bit about you and your business. So why don't you kind of kick it off with us here? Tell us a little bit about your background and how that ultimately led up to you founding this company, Growth Catalyst Group.
Yeah, Kevin, first, again, thanks for the opportunity to talk about what we do. It's an exciting space to be in, believe it or not. Although in the past, warehousing wasn't as sexy, but I think technology is making a difference, and also the consumer behavior is really driving the changes that we're driving. So first, the reason why we are called Growth Catalyst Group is that really defines our mission, and which is to help our clients, our companies that we're helping, we enable their growth. So that's our laser focus overall. And it was about 8 years ago when I and few others, after 20 plus years of corporate in for each one of us, we decided to have some fun. And fun for us is when we help companies scale their business.
Okay.
So that's where it all started 8 years ago. And so Growth Catalyst Group, essentially we are, and our goal is to be one-stop shop for supply chain innovation globally. And so you'll see we do a number of things, but it's all tied to anything supply chain related. And of course, warehousing is part of that. And there are three companies under GCG. First one, Advarix, has three big areas. One is boots on the ground consulting. And second is technology that we built in our space for warehousing and transportation. And third is a supply chain command center, a global command center that's tracking things end to end. The second company is Expedal, focused on smaller businesses, but it's a 3PL, pick, pack, ship, e-commerce, and B2B for SMBs, small and medium businesses.
Okay.
The third company is Archway that we acquired, which focuses on Fortune 500 companies, also for supply chain, regular e-commerce, B2B, but the forte with Archway is also in-store marketing supply chain. So when you walk into your favorite Starbucks to get your cup of coffee, the signage that you see here comes from us, from Archway. So that's really defines GCG. Your other question was like, why did I even get into it?
Yeah.
Prior to starting GCG, like I said, worked for larger companies, including FedEx and Amazon. And touch on Amazon first, I was pulled out of FedEx to start Amazon's home delivery. I was first employee for Amazon Logistics. And fascinating experience, got to start home delivery in US, UK, India, China. And so those gray vans with the smileys that come to your home came out of that. You can blame me and the rest of the team that was there for that.
Okay.
And then the other big deployment was we never got packages on Sundays 12 years ago. So we launched that as well. That was a partnership with USPS to do the final mile, and everything else we built high speed at Amazon. Prior to Amazon, I was at FedEx for 7 years and did many things, but I think the most exciting one was creating the first centralized dispatch in the US. Think of this as an air traffic control for trucks.
Yeah.
And we built a driver app on a push-to-talk phone, believe it or not, because smartphones didn't even exist. And I was watching my drivers on my screen long before Uber and Lyft came into play. And we were able to optimize US-wide routes and cut the fleet significantly. It was a pretty significant financial impact positively for the company. With all that experience, now last 8 years, we've been helping companies scale in long list of young companies that are now household names and gone public or became unicorns, all the way to Fortune 500 companies that we support between the three companies overall.
Interesting. And very interesting background there too. So are you saying that the smiley face on the truck was your idea? Was that your idea?
Not my idea. Amazon wanted to do that, and I was part of the team that launched that. But the very first delivery station in the US was outside of LAX in Inglewood. So I was part of that launch. That's where it all started.
Very nice. Yeah. And I think, obviously with that background, you've seen a lot in the industry, both from beginning stages to full-on growth stages, which, as the name suggests, growth catalyst, right? You've certainly been a part of some high growth things that are happening there, especially with that Amazon Logistics home delivery start there, and some of these things around FedEx too as well, and now the businesses that you're working with. So you've seen kind of the spectrum of these larger corporations, larger businesses, and smaller businesses as they're trying to grow and navigate through all of these different supply chain things that are going on, and supply chain has certainly become it's always been very interesting, but it's certainly become much more interesting and much more highlighted lately in the last 5 or 6 years here. So now, if you look at the industry right now, I mean, based on your experience and what you're doing now, I'm curious, what are you seeing are some of the largest challenges on the warehousing and fulfillment side of the supply chain right now?
Yeah, and Kevin, great question. To answer that, let me just do a few seconds of like the history of where supply chain has evolved overall. And so in the past, before e-commerce completely took off, it was all retail. So you would manufacture products and you would push it down to the stores. Eventually, you started to move manufacturing over to China and so on to reduce cost, but it was still a push supply chain where you decided what are the next wave of products you want to push to the stores. Well, with e-commerce, the control has shifted completely in the hands of the consumers, because as a consumer, you can decide which site you want to buy at, and then when you're pressing that buy button, that's when the entire supply chain has to adapt to what you just asked for. So what did you buy? How fast do you want it delivered? Where do you want it delivered? The entire supply chain has to adapt to that. So that's what we call pull supply chain, right? And it's getting pulled by the end consumer in that case. Let's start with that to then say, okay, you can imagine the changes that are needed within everything in the middle, right? The warehousing and the trucking. It's pretty significant. And so what that did to the warehousing space is that some of the traditional 3PL business was pallet in, pallet out, right? To support the retail process. You get the pallets, you actually stored them, and you distributed those. That's why they were called DCs, distribution centers. And so anytime anybody calls them DCs these days, we tend to think they're stuck in the past, because now it's shifted to fulfillment centers, FCs. Right? And what's the difference? Well, you actually now fulfilling for eaches to going to homes versus pallets going to another B2B delivery to a store. And so and obviously Amazon drove it, but now the 3PL space, warehousing space, has rapidly adapted to what we call each is direct-to-consumer shipping and so on. So that's fulfillment. And I think the need today is for warehousing and 3PLs to be able to support both B2B and direct-to-consumer. So today in the market, you find companies that are service providers that are really good at either direct-to-consumer or really good at B2B. But the advantage, I think the opportunity there is companies that are able to support both. So in other words, if I get a truckload of certain product SKU, and I apply the right technology and support creating cases that are going to retail stores, but from the same inventory, they'll pick, pack, ship directly to somebody's home for e-commerce. So that's where the opportunity is. And you mentioned about the challenge. I think technology is a big piece of it to be able to adapt and move with that. But we've seen so much change or challenges in the supply chain side as well. Everybody knows what happened during COVID, where all the products, toilet paper, everything got wiped out. And then, by the way, the ships were stuck in China. They couldn't come over. And then when things opened up, it was a flood overall. So what that does is it really creates feast or famine in terms of inventory, and has a big impact on the financials and the way warehousing is managed. During COVID, there was also a point where the capacity needed just completely there was hardly anything available. The cost skyrocketed. And many companies, 3PLs, warehousing companies, didn't survive through that. And what we did in that case was we worked closely with our customers, and we didn't have a choice. We had to increase pricing in that case overall. So I think that was a pandemic situation. What's happening now is geopolitical changes that are going on, the tariff wars that are going on. The impact on the supply chain is very, very similar in that case, where when the first tariffs were first announced, many companies quickly, accelerated getting inventory in the U.S., right? And that has a direct impact on your cash flow if you're just piling up on inventory. And then once the tariffs kicked in and the back and forth that is going on, it's very hard for these companies to figure out how do we adapt to these changes overall. So what I'm highlighting is, I think the biggest challenges are external forces that you may not even realize, like what's the next wave coming, next wave of changes coming. But then if you keep that aside, we advise our customers on the consulting side of warehousing companies to say, okay, separate out things that are outside of your control and think about those areas that you can control. And are you applying the right technology and analytics to make sure that you're getting stronger and stronger internally?
We'll be back after a quick break.
Struggling with scanning errors and peeling labels? Moving or reconfiguring your warehouse? Implementing a new WMS? The wrong labels can slow your operation down. Luckily, ID Label has durable, scannable barcode labels and signs built to last and keep your operation moving. Plus, if you need to get those labels installed, they've got it covered. Their expert team installs rack labels, overhead signs, floor striping, and more with precision, so your warehouse operations continue uninterrupted. I've installed tens of thousands of labels in my career, and I wish I had someone else do it for me. Get a free sample pack at idlabelinc.com, because when they do the barcodes, you can do more. That's idlabelinc.com for a free sample pack and more information. Interesting. Yeah. And I think it's interesting to see that evolution, because certainly, you mentioned the pandemic in there, and you mentioned that, traditionally it was like one 3PL maybe that's, very good at doing like B2B distribution, and one that's good at direct to consumer, right? But now like they want to bring those together, right? And how do we perfect it? And like, as you mentioned, there's an opportunity to do that. So I'm curious on that regard, because a lot of companies, I think, were trying to figure that out during the pandemic, right? Because, B2B distribution to a retailer was kind of dead in a sense, right? I mean, there was no brick and mortar really happening. So, companies are trying to figure out how to navigate that. So how would you advise a company to to bring those two together, like whether they are, traditionally have started out with D2C or traditionally have started out with B2B and they're strong on that. Like, how do they add that to their portfolio successfully without it just being kind of just a bolt on to try and capture that clientele?
Yeah. So to answer your question, it actually for most businesses can get pretty overwhelming because we're thinking about, customers really want it in 2 days, next days, in some cases even same day. So the consumer behavior is shifting quickly. Then there's the physical network, like how many buildings should you have, where should you have those buildings, and so on. And that is not just leases, it's labor cost and so on. And transportation is a big piece as well. How do you connect these dots and so on? So there's lots of things to consider when you're making that shift from B2B to direct to consumer. So how do you go about it, right? So what we recommend always is think about the customers first and start to build your supply chain based on that. So if you think about customers, depending on what space you're in, do the customers really asking for same day delivery, next day delivery, or is your product good enough to be delivered in 5 days? Answering that question changes your design completely in terms of the supply chain. So once you decide where's your customer base, what's the density look like, which cities, which markets are you serving? Secondly, what kind of service that you're offering, what's speed of delivery and so on? And then what kind of price elasticity can you sustain? Are the customers willing to pay for extra service or not? So answering those questions gives you a great start to then try to figure out how do we design the whole thing. And so we typically look at from there on, let's make sure the network is designed properly. You have the right size buildings in the right place to begin with. Once you have that, then you start to look at, hey, how do you optimize within the four walls? So I mentioned the inventory coming in, and you have the right technology to do both B2B and direct to consumer in that case. And so what we realize is traditionally many of these companies invested millions of dollars to get big systems, JDA in Manhattan. These are really good systems, but they were built a couple of decades ago. And in the past, the thinking was, you make massive investment, takes 2-3 years to implement, and then you keep running for many, many years. Well, when e-commerce direct to consumer comes in, some companies just bolt on new technology trying to manage that and so on. I think that's changed quite a bit. And in the past, also, these tech platforms were built, and then companies had to adapt to the systems. We believe it's backwards. It should be the other way around, where operating processes should not have to change to adapt to the technology. In fact, the technology should support the most optimized operating processes. So the approach we take is, it's always process first. Let's make sure that we clearly understand what's the most lean process, more efficient process operationally. And then can you configure the technology to support that? We call it custom fit. So you don't want to custom build in every case. We do want to custom fit to the best process overall. And so that's how you start to now say, okay, I have a pallet coming. I need to create cases. I need to go B2B, but also want to do direct to consumer. Let's map out what those processes look like and what kind of service levels did we commit to the consumers. And based on that, you can configure the technology to support that. And then the last piece I'd say is transportation in the past has been an afterthought. You can't afford to do that anymore. In many cases, logistics cost is higher than fulfillment. And so, again, being in the wrong place can actually impact your transportation cost. You might think, labor cost is cheaper, so let's put a warehouse in a certain city, not realizing that you didn't really think about how much it's going to cost to actually move the goods. So transportation plays a big role. When I say transportation, making sure the right method of shipping, should you use truckload, should you use LTL? If the customers are willing to pay for next day, can you use commercial airlines even to fly packages in that case? So all those options are there to start to solve for that.
Interesting. Yeah. And I think it's interesting, you mentioned there talking about some of the big players, traditionally big players, right, in kind of the technology side of things. But, how do you look at the technology to be able to be up to date, right, and be able to tackle, like, what are the problems right now? So very interesting there. And you also mentioned earlier, kind of being prepared for big waves of change, right? Because we've seen definitely some big waves of change in the supply chain. The pandemic probably being the largest wave, right? Maybe we'll call that like a tidal wave, actually, of change within the supply chain. And now we see, some other changes happening too as well. And I think one of the top words right now as we're recording this is certainly uncertainty, right? Navigating uncertainty through tariffs, these trade policies, and all these different things that are happening and changing on a fairly rapid basis, and a little of uncertainty of where is it going to end up. So I'm curious your perspective on when the dust settles, right, and there are like trade agreements in place, and we have some idea of what are the tariffs going to look like with different countries for hopefully in a steady state for a few years, right? What does the distribution and fulfillment landscape look like kind of in the long term when that dust settles? What is your opinion there?
Yeah, so I think there were two parts to that question. One is, how do you build a resilient supply chain and a business with warehousing? The other part was, in future, where are we headed overall? So let me answer the first one first, which is the way I describe this is, it's like we should expect that at some point you're going to fall sick, but keep taking your vitamins. The idea is, can you continue to build your business make sure that it has the strength needed to fight the changes? Well, I shouldn't say fight the changes. We actually say embrace the changes, because more you think about these changes as a challenge, it just shows that you're not prepared, right, to handle it. The more prepared you are, or changes are a constant, it's going to happen at some point. You're designing your supply chain and the business to fight that. So I think especially now, for example, with all the tariffs, a lot of companies got worried, and our advice there is to don't panic and start to look at things that are in your control and start to improve your business anyway. So, for example, again, do you have a continuous improvement program within your warehousing? Your technology platform that you're using, or the partners that you're using, are they able to support and be nimble in the changes that you need? In many cases, we're also looking at, hey, look at your org chart, look at your SG&A. Just make sure that you're financially the strongest you can be, and just put you in a stronger position then to handle the changes, things that are outside of your control, like the tariffs or other geopolitical challenges. So that's what we are advising companies on how to fight this. And in many cases, we're helping them drive those changes already. Don't wait for the change. So that's the first part. The second part is, hey, where are we all headed? I think my observation, obviously, is the discussions between U.S. and China and the tariffs and so on. Companies are looking to make sure that you're not putting all eggs in the China one basket, and they're looking to spread the sourcing out to begin with. And a few months ago, we were already helping companies think about nearshoring versus offshoring.
Okay.
But then we also saw tension between Mexico and U.S. and Canada. So even that is a question mark.
Yeah.
So most companies are thinking, okay, we want to do multi-sourcing, and how much of that can be brought back to the U.S. manufacturing-wise, which would be ideal, except that bringing manufacturing overnight is not possible. It takes time, and it takes investment as well, especially if you need manufacturing set up. And then another challenge is that capital is not cheap anymore, right? The interest rates are pretty high still. So these are all the challenges that the businesses are facing. But I think most businesses will get through it with these changes. And future, I believe, will be businesses that are multi-sourcing from multiple geolocations, but then in sources within bringing manufacturing within the U.S. Obviously, that's the big focus. That's where the shift will happen. And having said all that, who actually bears the cost of all that is still to be seen. I believe it's a balance between these businesses and the companies and the consumers. So, which I think some of this will lead to inflation. We have to see how much of that can be absorbed by the companies versus the consumers and so on. So I think that is actually driving the consumer behavior to change as well. Till now, customers want it faster as promised, and then they don't want to pay for the delivery as cheapest as possible.
Yeah.
But now, given what's going on, we've seen the consumer behavior, in fact, in some cases, shift to buying used goods that they were not doing before, or they may be okay getting a delayed delivery instead of paying a premium to get it faster. So those are some of the consumer behaviors that we're expecting to shift as well.
Yeah, very interesting, and it's interesting you mentioned that there in the end, because as we're recording like this week, I mean, there's a lot of discussion going on about like Temu, for example, is now showing like what the tariff charge is or the import charge is, and you're seeing that that this imported things from China at a very low cost is now not really there anymore. It's kind of going away because of the tariffs and things like that. So it'd be interesting to see how that continues to evolve. And you mentioned something earlier about focusing on where are you strong, right, as a business within these waves of change, right, and make sure that you are kind of focusing in on that, and then I think part of that too is adding in some of these newer technologies, right? But there's certainly a wide range of technologies and solutions that are in our space now. There's a lot of startups that have come out. There's a lot of companies that have been around for a while, but the technology is still very new for like a warehouse fulfillment environment. So how do you advise companies how to approach some of these newer technologies and just innovation overall, whether that's automation or robotics or AI, whatever the case may be? How do you advise them to approach some of these newer technologies and maybe not make a bad decision? I guess also not make a decision and end up falling behind. How do you advise them to kind of balance that and approach innovation?
Yeah, so I think it's imperative that you don't fall behind technology-wise, because technology helps you serve the customers better, right? Customer experience and so on. At the same time, it helps you improve your margins and EBITDA with automation. So this based in the question is like what kind of technology and where and how should you go about it? And so if you're a business that already has a strong technology team in-house, then the answer is slightly different, is make sure you keep them challenged in terms of staying ahead of the market in terms of what's going on and the consumer expectations or your customer expectations in that case. But if you're not fortunate enough to have a strong team, then make sure you have strong partners that are helping you stay ahead as well. I think being part of your business community, other companies, and being up to speed on what's going on, right? What are some of the trends is important so you don't fall behind. So one is knowing what needs to be done in terms of technology. The other one is like how to go about it. And the age-old question about buy versus build, I'd say buy versus build versus partner is how do you in just knowing that, hey, if you're even building your own technology, what's the core, and be okay with getting help outside of the core or bringing other partners in if that makes sense. And then I think, but at the fundamental level, things have moved. Everything's moved to cloud, obviously, and we hardly ever talk about hardware on site and so on. So all that plays in role. Of course, AI a few months ago felt like just a buzzword, but it's not. Yeah. We're actually actively applying AI, especially agentic AI, in improving our own operations, our own tech platforms in many, many ways, including a new tech platform that we built for retail stores, right, for compliance of the signage that goes into the stores, right? How do you make sure the stores actually put up the signs on time? And because the CMOs are expecting certain results, when they don't get the results, it's hard to say what happened in that case, for sure, right? And so we've built technology where it actually for sure can tell you what was the geocode timestamp, what was it actually pixel to pixel match, whether it was done on time or not. Lots of applications of AI in the warehousing as well. I think we've seen technology about not having to scan every box on the pallet, for example, and a lot of automation on our call center side as well, where, again, agentic AI is helping streamline and automate some of those processes as well. So all in all, to summarize, it's first knowing what all you need to stay up with, and then deciding buy versus build versus partner, and then making sure that at the leadership level somebody is owning and leading, helping the business stay ahead as far as technology is concerned.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's really interesting to hear. And it is like an interesting balance. And I love that you had the, build versus buy versus partner now, right? Because I think there are so many companies that are trying to almost address the same problems now, right? But it's kind of like, how many times can you try and rebuild the same solution? And maybe you build something a little different, but at the core, like foundationally, you could utilize somebody else's tech they've already built and partner with them to figure out how to make that solution exactly what you need it to be, and tailored in that sense. So really interesting insights there, and really appreciate your thoughts too, and perspectives here, as you've seen so much in your career and been involved in so much growth and different companies as well. So really interesting to talk to you here today, Manish. And if people want to get in touch with you or learn more about Growth Catalyst Group, what's the best way to do that?
Obviously, a lot of information on our websites and LinkedIn, but anybody can feel free to reach out to our leadership team if there's anything we can do to help. Of course, my email address is mkapoor@advatix.com, which is advatix.com, and be happy to support any businesses looking for help supply chain wise.
All right, great. And we'll definitely put all that information at thenewwarehouse.com as well as in the show notes here. So Manish, thank you once again for your time on the show today.
You've been listening to the New Warehouse Podcast with Kevin Lawton. Subscribe and check us out online at thenewwarehouse.com.
Enjoyed this episode? Make sure you are subscribed to the podcast, and for more content from the New Warehouse, find us on LinkedIn and YouTube. Links to subscribe can be found in the show notes, and for everything The New Warehouse, head to thenewwarehouse.com.